So welcome everyone. I'm TJ. I'm the Communications Director and Facilitator for the All Learners Network, and so excited to have folks here today. We're also excited to have Christian presenting with us. He's actually currently teaching a menu course at our Learning Center. And Christian is from the Chittenden, Vermont County area I always forget the name of your district now, Christian, because it's changed. It was Chittenden East.
It's now MMUUSD, Mount Mansfield Unified Union.
Okay, that's the one. So he's a K-4 math coach there across several different schools, and also a facilitator with us here at All Learners.
Awesome. Welcome, everyone. My name's Christian Courtemarche. As TJ introduced me a moment ago, I've had the advantage of working around these ideas of math menu for just about a decade now. In probably a little under a dozen school districts, and I've taught almost 24 courses in math menu, and so have gotten to see this really play out in action all across the region, as well as see this in as early as pre-K classrooms and into upper grades through high school. And so have really had some experience watching districts fully implement menu, as well as individual teachers try to learn about math menu and really carry that back to their school building, and asking more about what that might look like for them to start this on their own and maybe have a ripple effect across their schools. And so we're all here together today to really look less about individual classroom implementation and more as coaching for a math menu structure, coaching for differentiation. I noticed in the chat we have some variety of program directors and curriculum specialists, as well as coaches. Predominantly, it appears that the folks that we've got in this session all have some sort of a seat in leadership. And so we'll talk more about that as we move along, and how we can use influence in our classrooms to bring in more differentiation, more intervention. Great. So we have a variety. We have some folks that are just exclusive to K-4. We have a whole bunch of folks that are kind of working in the broader K-8 system, or maybe even K-12. And then we have at least one individual who's working at that high school level and looking on making some big impacts in high school systems. Fabulous. That helps me see some shape of the data. And so it seems like most of you right now, as we look at the shape here, we're looking at impacting sort of a greater group. At least one of you is looking to grow your practice or the practice of a colleague, but a lot of you, it seems, is going to be impacting and working with a variety of folks in regards to menu. And so that helps. Just so you know, my experience, I started in this journey around a decade ago, really looking at my own classroom and impacting those around me. And then I quickly shifted, working in a system of 8 different schools, predominantly 6 schools, but also working alongside 2 others. And now I'm sort of working along many districts and looking to grow practice in that sense. So it seems like a lot of you have already heard about menu, have sort of captured some of that vision, and some of the folks that you're working with are in some of those early stages of kind of getting those logistics out. And then some of you already seems to have some of those logistics around, and you're coaching and influencing, making it better, making cohesive, making systems connect more. This is super helpful for me, because then I can kind of pick a speed that's appropriate for all of us. So hop back over to the Zoom link. I'm going to share my screen now that I kind of have a sense of where you all are. All right. As we get started, just a couple of different things. You saw this slide in the main presentation in the keynote for today. It's also been the slide that's been in all of our sessions together. And so you can find All Learners Network on all of those social media platforms. And I encourage you to use those to share those out with colleagues. The other thing I want to do as we start this sort of a smaller group conversation together is take a look at these common agreements. We're interfacing across states, we're interfacing across roles. And so I want us to allow us, there's going to be portions of time when we're in breakout rooms. We're going to be connecting with others and hearing and doing some problems of practice as coaches with others, as well as engaging with some of the content that I've prepared in the coaching experience that I've had over the last decade. And so I want you to just take one quick moment And hit me with a thumbs up if you feel like you can agree to these as we interact together today. Awesome. It's a great thing to do with students. It's a great thing to do with colleagues when I'm working, especially when I'm working virtually, to have something like that where we can actually take a look at these and say, you know, we're all here to learn. We're all here to be present and be mindful of what kind of a presence you have in the digital sphere. All right, let's get started. I'm going to share a ton about my own history with Menu, but it's not going to be in the context of a narrative, like Aaron had the context of a narrative. My goal here is that you leave our 90 minutes together twofold. One, with this idea of what's that timeline for implementation look like? And how can I use certain coaching moves or leadership moves at any spot in that timeline to continue to grow our practice, to become more inclusive, to become more differentiated, to become more student outcome and student centric. The second thing I really want to do is actually to provide some space as a collaborative group a little bit later in the session to think about some sort of classic things that crop up as we're implementing Menu. And so there will be a time when we're going to do a little scenario playing out and thinking about and even rehearsing a little, so to speak, although it's not going to be like rehearsing in the sense of role playing, but thinking a little bit about like, how would I respond to this? You know, if I had a teacher say this, how could I respond to that so that we can actually move forward and not get stuck, so that we can actually keep dancing and keep growing without jeopardizing a relationship or getting stuck in a certain place. And so twofold there, like this idea of how can I use leadership to move this idea of Menu implementation forward? And then the second piece of, as there become hurdles or roadblocks or hiccups or pitfalls along the way, what are those classic ones? And how could I interact with any of those so that I continue building a relationship and that win some connection with folks, as well as move through it, move past it, and cause us all to question and grow? I want to think about this in 3 different phases. Ready? As I think about Menu implementation in any new district or district that I might be entering where there's pockets of folks that have Menu, or where everybody's working on Menu and we're looking at making it move forward, this is kind of how I would illustrate any of those phases. Phase 1, I'm going to kind of call inspire the longing. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about why the heck would you call phase 1 that? I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. Phase 2 would be this idea of like, how can, after we've inspired that longing and got that buy-in, how can we support the structures of Menu? Now that we have this buy-in, now that people have these core beliefs and they really see that need, how can we actually get those logistics to get things off the ground, to get things rolling? As messy and as tricky and complicated as that can be, how can we get those structures in place? And then the third piece is, how can we build that cohesion? Right? How can we connect those systems from all of the different areas of professional development and learning? How can we connect the things that my principal's doing, my curriculum director is doing, the coach is doing, the classroom teacher is doing? How does a PLC or grade level team meeting connect in the work that's happening in my math block, in main lesson, in Menu? How can those data team meetings connect with what's going on in Menu? And so as you look at the screen right now and you pause and you say, okay, you know, we just did that smiley face activity where you know, we kind of read the room and saw where the group was. As you think about those, you could also translate those into any of these 3 stages. You know, is a great deal of the work that I'm doing as a coach really trying to inspire the longing amongst my colleagues? Is a great deal of the work that I'm doing as a coach supporting the structures and really getting some of those logistics across the building, across the district, as you all pointed out? Or and how can I connect the things that are already in place so that Menu doesn't feel like this extra thing, this initiative that was brought in by someone else that, you know, that is disconnected from the things that are already going on? So 3 different phases. We're going to talk about each phase individually, and we're going to talk about like, what are the pitfalls that happen? What are the things that crop up? What should we be focusing on in our roles? Okay. So first, let's talk about this idea of inspire the longing. I'm gonna give the floor for a second to one of my favorite authors of all time. You ready for this? I very first read this book not in English, and it's a kid's book, The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, right? 1943. I love this quote. And I think this really applies to what we're talking about here in Menu. I'm going to read it aloud because sometimes kids' books are best read out loud. In fact, sometimes I think that's the way kids' books are intended. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood, and don't assign them tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. This is my backdrop in coaching. This is what I actually think is like 7/10 of the work that I do is coaching. Not helping people to collect wood, not helping people to assign them to tasks and work to do, but actually to teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. Right? Like I've tasted and seen what education can look like. I've seen a different way. And how can I then also do that for others? So they say, oh my gosh, the things that I thought used to be my best practices pale in comparison to the beauty of this sea. I really long, can someone please give me some wood and some tasks and some work to do? Because gosh, if it could look like that, I'll put in the extra effort. I'll really work on that self-reflection and working hard, right? And so phase one isn't, hey, everybody, let's get the logistics of menu under our belts and then we can move forward. Phase one rather is this idea of what are the issues that we're facing right now? And is there another way? Is there a different way? Because once we do that, there's no convincing left to do, right? Once we do that, everybody's going to go be curious and experiment and try things out on their own. And then we are continuing to shape and give tasks and get more wood and get more materials so that that work can happen, right? And so as I'm thinking about menu, as I'm thinking about this quote, the best way that I drum up this immense curiosity of the vast immensity of sea is to ask this one question. And the one question goes like this. If you're a 9th grade teacher or a 1st grade teacher, if you're a 6th grade math specialist, or you're in 8th grade and you work with 4 different grade, groups of math all at 8th grade, the question I always want to ask is this: do you have time for both inclusion and differentiation? As you audit the time that you have with students, this limited time called your math block, you don't have an endless amount of time for math. And so as you audit that small amount of time that you have for math, do you have dedicated, devoted time for both inclusion and differentiation? So I want to unpack these words for just a minute, because I think part of this helps us get that vision of the sea. This idea of hang on, we'll stay here. This idea of inclusion, do you have a time, and this is the one that people tend to have, do you have a time in your class where you are moving forward with your grade level standards, where you are moving forward with grade level big ideas, grade level curricula, right? Are you inviting everyone to that pool, as Erin Oliver talked about in her keynote, right? Is there this time when you're moving forward with the content that you've parsed out in a scope and sequence across your year? And the follow-up question is, everyone invited to that time? Are there kids at that grade level that are pulled out of that time? Are there kids at that grade level that go to a different room during that time? Are there kids at that grade level that, regardless of their readiness, they are included, they belong, they have access to the mathematics at that particular grade level? We're going to call that main lesson. If you've worked with all learners before, we always love to call that thing, that's the main lesson, right? Like that's the grade level math. If I'm an 8th grade teacher, my inclusion time is 8th grade math. If I'm a 1st grade teacher, my inclusion time is first grade standards, 1st grade content. Everyone is invited in that time. That's not been the way it's been in US history. There have been so many times in US history, and Erin's story really resonates with this, where not everyone is invited. And some people right now think that's actually what we should go back to. Gosh, aren't there some kids that are destined to work at the mill? Aren't there some kids that are destined to work at the gas station? We need those jobs too, Christian. Are we saying that every child, all means all, every child is included and can have access to that part of the math block? Let's talk about the other thing. Is there a separate time or a portion of my math block where I look at exactly what everyone needs and I provide differentiated work for that? Is there this time in my math block where it's less about necessarily tromping forward with my grade level standards, but rather really paying attention to exactly all of the unfinished learning that everybody has? If I'm going to work with a small group in any one of these things, it's going to look different, whether I'm in the inclusion time or whether I'm in that differentiation time. What I think is so interesting is that in literacy, if you ask grownups to close their eyes and picture what literacy looked like as a child, they'd say, well, there's this portion of that literacy block where the teacher actually got in front of everybody and we had this lesson aspect. It was about character traits, or, it was about problem and solution. There was that time. And then what was the rest of the time? Well, then the rest of the time, kids were reading books all around the room, and the teacher was conferring one-on-one with individuals, or working with a guided reading group, or working with a small group. Were they all at the same book levels? No, everybody was at a different book level. But there was both this time in that literacy block where we were all together, we were all included for that main lesson part. And there was this other time in that reading block where kids were reading the books at their just right level. And if I was to ask you right now, like, picture the math class that you had as a child. Did you have those two components? Is that the vision of math in your mind? Was there both inclusion and just right work, differentiation? Okay, so let's move forward. Casting this vision, asking this question, longing for both of these things, longing in this for a balanced math block. If I have like 60 minutes, so I have like 40 minutes where I'm moving forward with my grade level standards, my grade level high leverage content, and I reserve this 20 minutes where everybody has access to differentiated work that's at their just right level, right? So when I'm at that main lesson, right, we're moving forward with our common goals. We're moving forward with our common standards. When I think about the access that I need to give to all students, some students are at various readiness levels. And so I can provide support so that they have access and inclusion to my grade levels content. I'm always thinking about accommodating and adjusting, not changing the math, not watering down the standards, but rather lifting students up so that they can access that rigorous, that engaging, that high leverage content at my own grade level. The planning is always looking forward. The plan is always thinking about that end of year goal in mind and thinking of the progression of student learning along the way. And we're moving forward in that way and giving access to all learners. The other end of the spectrum, this idea of that differentiated part, the menu part, would be this idea of looking at everybody's readiness levels, really exploring what is the unfinished learning, what's the gaps from the prior years or prior units is often the way it rattles off my tongue. What's that unfinished learning that has happened in pockets and individuals and small groups of prior years and prior learners, prior units? Then I can differentiate, and just like that reading teacher is doing, where one group is reading Charlotte's Web and another group is reading Frog and Toad, at this time in my math block, then I can work with individuals, I can work with small groups just at the specific skills that they need to work on, even if it's not the content that's happening in main lesson, right? While I'm doing that, if you picture that literacy block and imagine what that would be like in our math block, while I'm doing that, it can also be providing this differentiated work, right? When I have 4 children at home, when I think about the kids, my own kids, and what it looks like for their literacy classroom, they've got like a stack of books. They're all working at their own levels and going through those books while the teacher is doing this work, right? And then this last idea is when I think about planning for that time, when I think about working with teachers and introducing them to that allure, I'm saying, unlike that main lesson, this is the one where you actually really think about student need and provide that planning and response to student need, right? When I'm working alongside kids, then this is a huge question that I ask teachers, and I want to ask you all right now. Do you have a main lesson? Do you have a menu? Is there inclusion, and is there a differentiation? The terms I would love to use when you're working alongside students then in main lesson, when I'm sitting alongside students, it's really about guided practice, right? Because this is the now work. This is the stuff that we're working on right now. I'm not changing my grade level goal. I'm maintaining that. This is the guided practice. And so if I'm a special educator and I'm co-teaching at main lesson and I'm working with a group of students, I'm not working on something else. I'm supporting and I'm giving access, I'm giving inclusionary supports, I'm guided practicing with students on those main lesson pieces. But then when I'm working alongside students at menu, that's this idea of targeted instruction. That's this idea of like, I'm in the menu time. It's not the now work necessarily. It's really targeted goals, personalized goals, small group goals. We're going to work for the next 3 weeks on this thing until we fill that unfinished learning. Right. And so asking teachers, because I think this is a question that everyone is asking right now in this pandemic. If I have other people in my classroom, or I myself I'm thinking of my multi-tiered support systems, if I'm working only with small groups at main lesson, I never have an opportunity to fill holes from prior years and prior units, to work on that unfinished learning from prior years and prior units. And if I only am accessing intervention during menu time, when do kids get to work alongside an adult for the now content? That's why having a balanced math block, both of these things, really is something alluring for teachers. If I have both of these things in my math block, then I can work alongside students with the now content, and I can have classroom teachers, interventionists, special educators, providing targeted instruction based on what everybody needs. Aaron talked about the math pool earlier, and I'd like to take that analogy just a smidge further. In that main lesson, I think this also, as you are a coach and you have some holdouts and some folks asking questions around menu, if I think about this pool, right, and I think about supporting students in main lesson, it's kind of like floaties in the deep end, or maybe like a one-on-one coach in the deep end. Gosh, 6th grade, the content feels like the deep end of the swimming pool. And so we have these accommodations. We have these adults working alongside students in main lesson so that they have access to that deep end of the swimming pool, because frankly, the shallow end isn't that exciting. The deep end is really where the action is. Everybody wants to go to the deep end, even the little kids. And so we want to make sure every 6th grader is in the 6th grade deep end of the pool, even though if they were in the deep end, they might drown. And so we have these inclusionary supports, these accommodations, so they have access to the deep end. However, we can't pretend that just providing those means that they learn to swim without them, right? We can't just pretend that, like, just because we provided all of these accommodations and inclusionary supports, that they actually learn to swim in that 6th grade deep end. We also need this other side. We also need this idea of the breaststroke group, the Australian crawl group, the backstroke group, where I'm actually meeting you just where you are and working on those specific things. I'm actually coming out of that big, deep pool to work specifically on exactly what you need. If I only have the thing on the right, you don't get the joy of being in the big pool and being in the deep end. If I only have the deep end, but not the thing on the left, there's a temptation then to just keep staying with the floaties and never actually learning to do all of that rich swimming, that just right needed swimming that's going on in those targeted groups, right? I'll take one more step as I think about this pool analogy. So when I'm doing assessments, and I'm learning more about students, if I want to keep staying in this pool analogy, when I'm thinking about assessments, I'm kind of asking this question: is it safe for that child to swim in the deep end independently? You know, is this a 11th grader able to do that deep end swimming all by themselves? If we only use inclusionary supports, we never actually necessarily see what they're doing on that independent level. And if we only put them in that breaststroke group or that backstroke group, we never actually put them in the deep end to see what they're able to do. And so when I'm doing assessments, I'm always asking that question: are they safe on their own legs in this depth, right? Are they safe? I want to make sure I give that assessment independently, right? And when I'm giving assessments at menu time, it's really asking that question: well, what depth can they swim at independently? You know, they left the main lesson thing blank. Well, at the menu time, I can target down and bolt down to the very specific needs that they have. Asking this question about, do you have main lesson? Do you have menu? Do you have inclusion? Do you have differentiation? Is a huge way to inspire that longing for both of those things, right? So many buildings that I work in say, oh, you know what we ended up doing? We got an I block. But the I block is feeling really like it's missing the mark, because I have some students who both need reading intervention and math intervention. Well, if we had math menu, we'd overcome that pitfall, right? Oh, I feel like, this win block thing, I was really hoping it would work. But, some kids during win block are doing things like coding and STEM, and other kids are working in guided reading groups and guided math groups, and they're never accessing that coding or the STEM. That was actually a conversation in my own household recently about a win block. And so if we have Math Menu, we have this perfect just right time where we can be working with small groups exactly with what they need. So I want to pause for just a moment. I want you to consider as a coach right now, and you're thinking about, bringing out this allure, asking that question, what's your current model right now? What's working well in your system right now? Are there areas for growth? Are kids getting pulled out of science so they can have a math intervention? Right? Are there mindset shifts that need to happen? Well, Christian, we didn't actually give the assessment to those ones because, they're on an IEP. Shoot. Now I don't know if they can swim in the deep end because you didn't give them that assessment, right? Do we need some mindset shifts around these pieces? Are there systems that would change in order for us to have both inclusion and differentiation? So take a moment to think about that and think about what could be your next step at this juncture in your own building. All right. When I think about menu can look so different in so many different words and so many different worlds and so many different buildings and so many different grade levels and so many different schools. If I'm going to call it menu, I really am looking at three things. Ready? Can you name them? These are the three things that I always think about when I think about menu. There's this group of kids, going all around the room, and they are working on differentiated offerings. They're working on purposeful offerings. The offerings are selected purposefully, and it's got an S at the end of the word. There's not just one thing that they're working on, today's work. There's actually purposeful offerings. The other thing is, in order for it to really look like and feel like a menu, there is choice and independence. Students are making choices based on what they need, based on the activities that are just right for them. And there is also independence. It is guided by those students themselves. It is a muscle to build. And then the third thing that is so critical is this idea of, if I just have these two things, like it's this beautiful homeostasis that's going around the room, it is then got to free me up as a classroom teacher to meet with small groups. So there are teacher stations, or at least a teacher station going on with a classroom teacher during that time. If I don't have choice and independence, don't call it menu, call it centers, right? If I don't have purposeful offerings, then how do I know what those kids are working on is meaningful? And if I'm not doing teacher station, I'm totally missing the ball on capitalizing on this differentiated work time to do some real targeted instruction. If you think about when I mentioned earlier that this is kind of like Reader's Workshop, this feels a lot like what they're doing during that differentiated read time, right? They have that stack of books that they can go choose just right books at their own level. They're working through those books. It's an independent time. The teacher's pulling one-on-ones, the teacher's pulling small groups, some guided math to work on. A common pitfall that I see happen is teachers say, oh my gosh, Christian, my kids are just too wild. I could never pull a teacher station. My kids are just too wild. Or, Christian, that sounds great for middle school, but gosh, this is second grade. They're too young to do something like this. Couple ways as I coach around this. More often than not, when that happens, the work that is going on independently, those purposeful offerings that are going on around the room at an independent level, I need to make sure that the math in those is at an independent level. The work that's happening at teacher station obviously is really at an instructional level, but the work that happens around the room as kids are doing a variety of offerings, it has to be at an independent level. And that could be levels, right? They have to have access to mathematics that is at their own independent level, or else what's going to happen? If they don't have access to that math, or it's at a rigor that is not at an independent level, they're going to become not independent. They're going to become dependent. And then they're going to come interrupt your teacher station and bug you a ton, right? And so as you are working with teachers and teachers are saying, oh my gosh, kids keep interrupting teacher station, or I don't feel like I can do teacher station yet because my kids can't be that independent. This is one of the biggest things that I've seen over a decade of working with at least a dozen school districts. Is the work that's going on at that independent station, centers, offerings, is that work happening? Is it at an independent level? And again, if you think about the reading analogy, that's a lot like a reader's workshop. The books that they're doing around the room are really at an independent level. And the books that I'm working on with them at teacher station, that's at an instructional level. Huge aha here for a lot of teachers, particularly when they get stuck in this phase. Okay. Massive, massive growth here. Independent level, instructional level. This is the thing that they're working on with choice and around the room. This is the thing where I'm pulling groups. So think about that.
Hey,
As you look
Christian.
at each one, go ahead, TJ. We got some coming from the chat.
Yeah, there's just a question in the chat Karen's asking, does a menu always have to be differentiated by level, in quotes, or can it be different ways to learn the same content? Example with manipulatives or a game or a
Totally.
set, or yeah.
Thanks for TJ. Keep doing that when those pop up in the chat. That's a fabulous question, Karen, right? If I rewind the clock, to the early 1990s, there was this math program that Marilyn Burns had put out called Math Their Way. No, Math by All Means. And she had menus in there. And it's exactly what you just talked about, different modalities of learning where it's the same content, but this one's with manipulatives, this one's with problem solvers, this one's with collaborative games, this one's kind of working on fluency. This is an independent, reflection activity. And so there's this element when we're talking, and actually we're going to get more on the purposeful offerings in just a moment. When we're thinking about what those kids are doing at that independent level, there's sort of a both and going on here. We want to hit that variety of modalities. We want to hit kids with hands-on and games. We want to hit things where kids are working independently and also working collaboratively, because talking is where a lot of the learning happens. We also want to access different elements of the math practices, right? So we want opportunities for kids to have reflection. We want to have opportunities for kids to do problem solving. We want to have opportunities for kids to work on fluency. We also want to opportunities for kids to work on content and really just work on specific computational fluency, right? And so I think it's a both and. When I put together menus alongside teachers, if they're saying, hey, coach, I really need some help kind of crafting that menu, I predominantly am thinking about what are the needs of my students, what are those distributed practice needs that we don't want to get rusty on, that we should be offering all year long, right? It's going to be at my grade as well as the high leverage stuff from the grade level before me that we want to continually revisit in our menu offerings. And I want to do it in a way that is going to bring a lot of joy, right? And a lot of engagement. And so I'm going to talk about in like a couple of slides down, what would those suggested offerings be that would have a nice rounded menu. But I will say this. When I'm crafting a menu, I am not predominantly thinking of Gardner's multiple intelligences. There's a music math offering and a kinesthetic math offering and a interpersonal, intrapersonal math offering. I am actually thinking more about specifically the needs of my students, and then I may add those things in, but that's not necessarily how I would group the offerings according to different multiple intelligences. Great question. Thanks for that, Karen. We'll dig on that in just a moment. So as you think about each one of these things, as you think about the teachers that you interact with and engage with, as I look at each one of those, typically I'll ask folks to reflect on, does one feel a little bit more in your wheelhouse? Does one feel a little bit more risky? Another way to say that, is there a thing that you can envision? Is there a thing that you're having a hard time envisioning? Right? Like, oh, I could envision everybody doing the same thing on the same day while I work at the teacher station, but I'm having a harder time in picturing the choice. Great. Let's work on that one element. Let's play to your strengths and include the things that you're great at and work on that thing that feels a little bit out of your comfort zone. Okay. As you think about the teachers you work with, it typically folks feel kind of strong in one or two of these, and one of them feels like the new, right? The new thing to be thinking about. All right. As we wrap up this idea of like longing for, we have this notion of longing for a balanced math block where I can do both inclusion and differentiation, longing for giving more engagement through offering independence and choice and purposeful offerings. I'm going to continue with this by saying, as I work with teachers, asking the question, hey, do you have a system yet to really look at and revisit last year's high leverage concepts? Do you have a system for that yet? Do you send them off to an interventionist in a different room where they feel like they go down to the hall and not everybody else goes to the hall? As opposed to, I have teacher stations and maybe even the interventionist or the special educator comes to my menu and everybody is working in a small group. And so no one feels singled out and taken out of the room. Do you have a system for that? Do you also have this idea of I can distribute that kind of practice in purposeful offerings, right? Do you have this idea of developing self-efficacy, this idea that kids are actually working on that muscle of independence and choice? If I remove this, this will be a muscle that will be atrophied. Do I have included a safe place in my school day where kids can work at and develop and get better at choice and independence? And then that last piece, do you have a time during your day where teachers are providing that targeted instruction, not just guided practice in the current content, but targeted instruction at various readiness levels? Do you have these things? Have I inspired some longing through these questions? Well, what if you included more purposeful offerings that actually tucked in the prior grades high leverage stuff? What if you brought in more choice and independence where they could actually work on these skills, right? Do we want to prevent those skills? Do we want to manage and control those skills? Do we want to build up and scaffold those skills? Because frankly, these are the kids that'll run our country that we're going to all like get old in. So, it's my own well-being at the stakes here. All right. Half of what I do as a coach is I get people dissatisfied with their current model, right? In addition to the allure of the good, part of what I do as a coach is to say, you don't have that yet. I don't do that with my out loud voice, right? But part of it is getting people to see like, I'm actually not really satisfied with this eye block stuff. It's really not cut it. I really wish something else was, could solve that. Math menu. I actually feel like I mostly work with the kids on guided practice and not targeted instruction. Ooh, you know what? Math menu. I feel like, when I'm working with small groups, I'm only working on last year's stuff, but I don't really have that time to work on the now stuff. Math menu to the rescue, right? Getting people dissatisfied with current structures. I love this, that there's a great book out there called Switch, and it says the most effective goals provide like a postcard. Like I'm picturing this postcard from, Florida. And when I look at that postcard from Florida, you know what I imagine? Christian in Florida. That's what we get to do as coaches. We get to paint this picture of Florida. And then we say, can you picture you there? What would get you there? So part of this is questioning so that folks get dissatisfied with the messy, messed up current system and say, hey, there's this other thing that feels like Florida. And can you imagine you there? Like staring at that poster card, can you see yourself on that beach? Let's see if we can get you to that beach, right? That's going to lead us to phase 2. And we're about to actually split into some scenarios and breakout rooms in just a minute. Now we've got folks longing for this because we all have very similar issues in every state that we go to, in every school, K4, 5, 8, 9, 12. Every place is longing for this idea of differentiation and inclusion, of this idea of targeted instruction, of building more offerings and choice and independence. How can we get that structure? This is going to answer some of the questions that Karen asked a moment ago. How could I actually do that, Christian? I only have 40 minutes for math because I'm a middle grades teacher, or, I have 60 minutes for math. Where would menu fit? So here's 4 quick things to include in your tool belt of where it could have, right? You could do math menu right out of the gate. Imagine, they finish snack, and then they just trickle into their math menu offerings. The teacher grabs a group and works at a station. Their brains have all worked on that social stuff. They got the talk in, they got the choice in, they got the independence in. And then after about 15 minutes, you say, all right, meet me at the rug. It's time for a warm up, right? And now they're super brain in and ready for main lesson, right? Or you work with a team teacher, right? You're like a 6th grade teacher and some of your kids go over to that room for ELA and those kids come over to you for math, and you don't have to wait for those kids getting the drink at the water fountain to start your warm up, No, they trickle into their menu offerings. They say hi to their friends. They pull out a game and different kids are around the room doing different things. You're grabbing some kids to work with at a small group. After about 20 minutes, you say, all right, let's get together for main lessons. Clean up your menu stuff. Here we go. We're going to hit up main lesson now. The trickle in from something prior, starting with menu, dives right into this idea of differentiation. They get that social need of independence, choice, hanging with friends right out of the gate. And then, the black stuff on the screen, the main lesson stuff, they're super focused. They're super ready to get going. That's model one. Model two would be kind of the flip to that, right? Like I have my whole main lesson. We wrap it up, and then I say, all right, everybody, that's it for today. Let's all pull out our menu offerings and you go work at the stuff that you need to work on your menu right now. Right? That also, there could be a hard stop there and maybe menu some other time during the day. There's sort of this trickle in idea, like as kids are finishing up their main level work, they're pulling out menu offerings, which truly could happen at any of the other illustrations you see on the screen. But as you're finishing your work, pull out your menus. I'm going to grab a small group. We're shifting from the now content. We're moving more into the differentiated content. I'm hitting up a small group now. Then let's all come back and talk in our closure about ahas that happened at math today. Christian, I only have 40 minutes. I can't do like 20 and 20. All right, do a menu day. Do a menu day. Wednesday's menu day, right? Wednesday's menu day. This is the day, and our menu lasts multiple weeks. This is the day where we do that differentiated just right work, that distributed practice, that problem solving that happens. You could absolutely pull out your menu Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday as you finish your work, but Wednesday's the day we're going to devote to our menu time. Logistics matter. I actually have a preference on all these. I love starting with menu. I think you could kind of hear that in my voice. Any one of these can help teachers see where the inclusion and where the differentiation can happen in their math block. There's logistic number one, right? Logistic number two, Karen's question. Any suggestions on what I put on my menu? Personally, I sat with John Tapper and Karen Reinhardt about a decade ago and really talked through a lot of these. What do we want to put on a menu? What would be those suggested offerings? These are the things that typically could be a routine in our weekly or biweekly structure. Some sort of computational fluency maintenance. We call these window panes at All Learners Network. This idea of distributed review of content that we've already covered at that independent level or rich content from the prior grades. There's always going to be some fluency review going on. Games, this idea of rehearsal and repeated practice with peers, getting that social, the strategy, working on computation. Games are a great and rich way. I probably don't have to convince you of that. It's also what makes a menu super fun. Technology, using tech. Now that we have amazing technology at our fingertips, we can do amazing things with tech. It kind of sits in that same slot as games in the sense that predominantly technology is about practice or rehearsal with sort of digitized automated feedback. So whereas games, the feedback's coming from my peers, technology, right, it's coming from the computer. Problem solvers, math practice one, we've got to be working on the skill. And actually problem solvers really help us see all 8 of the math practices in action. This is very different than the story problems in most programs because the story problems are just kind of illustrating the content that we're doing now. Problem solvers get kids to pause and stop and say, huh? Let me read that again. Let's see what's going on. That's a rich problem solver. So we need to include that in our math routines. Journaling, this idea of reflection, reflecting on my math practice, that metacognitive piece. It's also a form of communication between student and teacher, right? Convince me that so-and-so says this, so-and-so says this. Which one do you agree with and why? It's causing students to reflect on the mathematics in a deeper way. And then obviously this idea of meeting with mixed groups of kids over different weeks, that teacher station piece. Sometimes groups are lasting like 3 weeks. Sometimes I just need to meet with them once. Sometimes it's one-on-one. Sometimes it's more of a sustained intervention that's lasting across multiple weeks, multiple days, but teacher station being that last piece. As you're thinking about working with teachers, thinking about, are there certain things that are just missing right now? Could those become a routine on menu? So those are what I would call the suggested offerings. That's not everything, but that, you could obviously put other things depending on your grade levels in there. You could put some data analysis and some graphing in there, data literacy. Thinking about, though, routines of offerings. When I go to a restaurant, kind of know what's going to be on the menu, right? Same thing with our math menus. When they go to menu time, they kind of know what's going to be on the menu. You don't necessarily have to explain that there's going to be these different offerings on a week-to-week basis. They should kind of expect what would be on that menu. The last thing I want to mention, go ahead, TJ. We got somebody else in the chat.
And not a question, but a comment in the comments about thinking that technology can be used to learn conceptually. How would you, if you can go back one slide, how would you see technology kind of integrating in those things?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't want to spend too much airtime on that particular one just because of the, we only have about 25 minutes left. However, I think right now there's a variety of uses of technology, right? There's individual and independent games or interactive slide decks that kids can work on for a variety of purposes. And so some of the ways that you could consider using technology would be, targeted games based on the practice, based on the rehearsal, the fluency that kids need to work on. Other things like, I've seen some amazing stuff come out over the last 18 months as a lot of kids were doing distance learning, where kids were actually interacting with one another over slide decks on problem solving. Obviously, there are also other technologies for purchase where kids can actually engage with rich content using a particular program that's for purchase. And you can, assign your class into a technology and, they take some initial formative assessing that kind of plops them into a different trajectory. As I think about those particular technologies, in my own opinion, nothing replaces the responsive and sort of the didactic back and forth between teacher and student. And so I don't usually use technology as this thing of like, hey, go down this rabbit hole on this one topic and teach yourself this content using this technology. Oftentimes, I feel like that sort of does not necessarily create a rock solid foundation to use technology as hey, go explore further and further about this thing, but rather let's use technology as a way to rehearse or practice or build a deeper sense of content that we have already engaged with. Great question. All right. The last thing that I kind of want to mention in this nuts and bolts portion is this idea of so we've got these two parts of our math block. We've got these different offerings going on at menu. There's independence, there's choice. I'm pulling kids at teacher station. The last thing is it's called menu because there's a menu, right? The menu is that predictable thing where kids at a week to week can see what are the offerings available to me. Like if this was reading time and that reading differentiated time, right? It's the books at their level. It's the books that they can access. On a math menu, there's this predictability thing where I really want to make sure that they have access to math, and the math is the main thing that they're focusing on. So this is providing a roadmap. These are the things that you have to complete by the end of the week. There are have-tos at the top. There are choices. You've got to pick at least one of these problem solvers, pick one of these levels of game, or pick this technology or that technology. Here's a journal prompt for you to respond to, right? And they can keep their math thinking inside a folder. They keep their template in the folder. And at the end of the week, they pull everything out and staple the template to the top. And you as the classroom teacher have a record of the whole week's level of work and an organizer on top where kids are actually showing and checking off the work that they did. This is very different than the pocket chart of old where, K4 teachers would like put kids in different centers and they were really guiding where kids are going and what they are working on. Instead, it's saying, here are all the offerings, all of the purposeful offerings for the week. You keep track of your work. You keep track. You have to do, these are the have-tos, these are the choices. You keep track throughout the week and mark off the ones that you did. Right. And so thinking about how we can organize this, my personal preference is that you, just like at a restaurant where there's going to be like appetizers, drinks, main course, desserts, that you have these predictable buckets. Like the menu you see on your screen right now, there's going to be this fluency maintenance window pane thing. There's going to be this journal thing. Then you've got problem solvers, games, tech, and journal at the bottom, right? There's this predictability that those things are going to stay the same week after week after week after week. And the actual problems within them are the things that are going to change. That way, on Monday, I don't have to explain everything going on at menu, because you already know when you go to this restaurant, these are the types of things on the menu. It's just that the specific thing may have changed. So as you're thinking about working with teachers, right, here are the questions that I would encourage you asking. Hey, when are you going to switch to menu? Let's put that one right out of the gate. When are you going to make the adjustment? What's it going to take for you to move from centers to menu, or not having a menu block to having a menu block? What do you think your offerings will be? Here's some suggestions. What feels just right for you? Do you want 6 things? Do you want 7 things, right? How are your students going to keep track of the work that they have is a coaching question I want. How are they going to use a template to mark off the work? Are they going to write the date? They're going to write M for Monday, T for Tuesday? Or is it going to be a checkbox and they're going to check it off? How are you going to do this slowly, right? More menus that I've seen fail because the teacher right out of the gate says, here's all 6 offerings, everybody. And kids are like, oh, I'm not ready for this. And I'm going to be at teacher station, kids. No, I need you still. There's this 6 weeks, this gradual implementation of getting them comfortable with each of the offerings. Let's start with just 2 offerings, then add in a third, then add in another, week after week after week. So we are gradually growing a menu. How are you going to do this slowly? Everybody does one station first, then add another in, right? Split the class into 2 groups. You guys are all doing this. You are all doing this, right? Do you have a targeted time frame for when you hope to get that first day of menu in? When do you hope to start teacher station? Great questions to ask folks. Couple more. This is one that I always think I really enjoy coaching and asking, like, what's the thing that feels the hardest to visualize? Is it the independence thing? Is that the resources? Do I have enough resources for this, Christian? Is it the teacher station thing? What do you think is going to be the most difficult to manage, right? What do you think you're going to need more resources on? Do you have a lot of problem solvers? Do you think it's going to be tricky to kind of make some distributed review each week? Which is the thing that you feel like you're going to need some more resources on? How can I help you with that as a coach? Is there a kid in your room who you're going to be like, oh my gosh, this kid's going to eat this up. Can't wait, because I can totally see this kid loving this. And the flip to that is, there's someone in that room that you think, having these kind of choices at hand, they're going to need some more support. How do you think you're going to support that kid, right? Always an important thing. So it's the end of the week and they staple everything together and you got the menu template on the cover, as a cover sheet on the front. What are you going to correct? What are you going to look at? What are you going to grade? What are you going to allow buddy checked, right? Great question to ask as a coach. Okay. Here's what I want to do. I'm actually going to scoot forward a little bit, because I want to give you an opportunity to play out a couple of scenarios. Okay. As we exit this phase, I want you to think about, as if you are a coach on this call, and I know a bunch of you are, ways that you can help this structure thing happen. Hey, I want to come to your planning block and help you plan out the template. It's a great coaching move. Another coaching move. Hey, let's sort that formative assessment that you just gave and think about what we want to put in our purposeful offerings next week. Let's sort that student work and think about who you want to work with at teacher station. Hey, I know that you said that you're feeling like you don't have a lot of problem solvers to put on your menu. As your coach, I'd love to help you figure out some good problem solvers at a variety of levels that anybody can access. Let me help you put together the problem solvers part of your menu this month. Hey, you feel like it's a little bit tricky. You can't quite envision what that small group thing is going to look like. Hey, I'd love to work with a small group. I'd love to do some targeted instruction. Why don't you do that with me? And then I'll pass the baton, right? So any one of these things are great coaching moves as folks are getting more and more comfortable with the structure and utilizing your coaching expertise. Okay, I want to stop for just a moment. Let me pull off of this, because I want us to actually do some of this. The question here is, how can we keep central things central when we're coaching? I don't want to get hung up in coaching on things that are peripheral. So what I'm going to do is, we're going to take about, 5:13. We're going to take about 7 minutes to do a quick scenario build in breakout rooms. All right. So TJ, can you give me 4 breakout rooms with the participants, and then I'll kind of pop into different breakout rooms. What I'm going to do is, in that document that we did with all the smiley faces at the beginning, if you scroll down to slide 10, I can even show it on my screen. If you scroll down to slide 10, you'll see all these different scenarios. I want you in your breakout room to pick a couple of these and actually talk through them. As you are doing that, though, what's good about what this teacher's already doing? What's the assets the teacher already has? And what's that follow-up question that you can ask that will help get them to the next level? Okay, so what's the good news, and what's that coaching follow-up question that will help get the teacher to the next level? I want to wrap out our final phase by sharing a few things and this idea of connecting systems, phase 3. And so a couple last things. If you didn't get an opportunity to work through all the scenarios, obviously this is something that you could actually bring back to your system. Hang on to that hyperlink and talk with other coaches in your district or other coaches. How would I do this? How would I do that? What's the good news? What's the next step? And as I said, all of those are true stories. I've got many more than that, but all of those are true stories. So I'm sure if you haven't heard it yet, you will hear it. I heard once that Mark Twain said, I can live for 2 months on a good compliment, right? And so as you're thinking about menu, in this role of coaching through menu, always starting with assets, right? Hey, I'm noticing this is going so well, and I wonder how we could use that to help us figure out this next step, right? Such a good thing to think about as a coach. I can live for 2 months on a good compliment. And so everybody is looking for that sense of belonging and that sense of affirmation right now. How can we do that to help things move forward any way that we can? All right. Last phase that I want to share with you, and then I want to show you where you can go get some more resources if you're looking for more resources. How can we take, we have this allure of the vision, how actually this may help so much of not just the academic needs, but also the social needs, of the engagement needs, and the compelling aspects of math class needs in my room. Then we move into sort of like, let's get these nuts and bolts under our belts. And then we have this idea of like, how can this actually cohere to all of the other things that's going on in my system? How can this connect the systems together? One is this idea of every district should have some sense of a data team or a PLC where we're regularly looking at formative assessment, and then we're analyzing student thinking, what they know, the assets they bring, and the misconceptions, and then thinking about how I can adjust my instruction based on that. Having math menu solve so many of those questions that come up as we're analyzing student work. When could I meet with small groups? How could I provide more rehearsal and practice based on this thing that I just noticed, right? How can I provide a next problem that they could work on now that they've done this? And so using math menu as a vehicle, I can think of a school system that I was working with where we spent the whole year, and every time we got together, we brought student work, and then we talked about, okay, what are we going to do at math menu, impacted now that we know this about our kids, whole group, small group, one-on-one, buddies, the differentiated offerings at menu. How can we use that menu as a vehicle for this? Couple other things. How can I use other types of PD as we cohere everything together? One would be this idea of thinking about the folks who really have it humming in their room, right? Like the menu time, that differentiated time is really moving forward smoothly. Can that classroom become a lab site for others to see? I'm crossing my fingers that it's going to be COVID friendly, but could you bring a group or even another teacher to come see a menu block, right? How could you have a lab site go in where folks could actually visit the menu, see the joy on everyone's faces, see what's happening at teacher station, look at one another's menus, right? Having some look fors in mind as you're visiting that thing. Hey, let's look for this when we go to that space. Buddy observations, if you can't do like a bigger lab site, getting that buddy observation thing, again, live on a compliment, as a buddy is observing you or as a colleague is observing you. Also, a gift you can give, they took a risk having you in their classroom. A gift you can give them is some things that you noticed that were amazing, that would really encourage them, right? Now they're going to come see your room and again, talk about the assets that you're bringing and maybe even talk about some encouraging elements as well. I mean, some areas for growth as well. Videotape coaching is obviously another one. Again, hey, let's video this menu block, specifically looking for engagement or specifically looking for kids looking for differentiated work at their own readiness level, right? Let's all look for that in the video. Couple others would be this idea of actually getting together in a planning meeting to talk about things that could go on at menu and on the menu itself. Or, and something that I've done with teams in the past is, okay, let's pull together the special educator, the interventionist, the paraeducator, the classroom teacher. What is your role during that differentiated menu block? What is your role? If you've had a lot of training before, I really hope you are doing targeted instruction and not just, bouncing around the room, checking in on individuals. I hope you're doing some of that sustained targeted instruction. So thinking about those roles piece, right? All teachers then become team teachers at menu time, right? Okay, the last thing I want to share with you, hang on, is if you go to the All Learners Network site, at the top, there is this tab that says Coaching Tools. In the coaching tools, you'll find a couple of things that could be very helpful for you as a coach. One, there's a menu planning sheet. That's something that you could use or adapt that talks about, we gave this task, what are the different things in a menu that we want to include now that we know this about our kids. There's also a weekly coaching template, some reflection that you can use in your coaching cycles as it connects with menu. And then the last one, this idea of developing menu really gives you, a spectrum of what menu will look like as it is implemented. The last one is a fidelity assessment, and that really gives you some look-fors, both in main lesson and in menu. What am I looking for as a coach to be happening during main lesson? With fidelity, and then what am I really looking for during menu time that is happening that will help me coach my teachers in their implementation of menu. So all of those tools are ones that they're all free. They're right at the All Learners site. If you go to the Coaching Tools tab, you can find all of those as well as the fidelity assessment. And so I encourage you to check those out as you think about moving forward. And I want to just end by saying my least favorite rubrics are ones that say proficient, partially proficient, and substantially below proficiency. And my favorite rubrics acknowledge the fact that we're all in different places and we've all had different background opportunities. And so as I think about teachers and think about their growth, I don't want to think about proficient, partially proficient, and substantially below. I want to think about folks are beginning this journey. They've been developing this journey for a while, and they're hitting that target. They're really, really humming, and all of the systems are coming together. And so I just want to end saying that, we all are beginning in some things, we're all developing in other things. And so as you think about your teachers, really pulling some of those folks that are really working hard and doing well on this inclusion differentiation piece, and potentially tapping them as experts in the field. And then folks who are still beginning, what are those small coaching moves that can just tweak things to make it a little bit more inclusive, a little bit more differentiated, and a little bit more engaging for all students. So thank you all for being here. And I encourage you all to keep waving the banner of main lesson menu, because I think it is an all learners approach for both inclusion and differentiation.